Hi there. As you may know, things in our universe tend to become disorganized or random unless we have energy input. On a machine like the StreetStrider with a lot of moving parts, things will get loose once in a while, and we have to make sure that they stay tight so the machine won't wear out and it will perform perfectly. Okay? I have a machine here, an ETX 8R, and I've intentionally loosened a few things. And I'm going to show you some of the things that can get loose. It won't happen very often, but it will once in a while. And I want you to pay attention to what can be maintained, how these bolts and things can be kept nice and tight with your toolkit, and how it will help the machine work very well. We're going to show you some things that you can check to make sure they're working properly. All right? First thing I want to show you is what can happen up front and how you can diagnose any problems. I'm going to grab the two front wheels and I'm going to try to wiggle them back and forth, and I say, oh, that shouldn't be wiggling like that. Well, let's find out where things are loose. Okay? Now, when I do this, I'm going to look at the linkages in here and see what's happening. This linkage looks nice and tight here, but this linkage where we screwed this in is a little bit loose. Okay? So this rod end can be tightened in against that nut that's behind this. I'm going to take my toolkit and use a 12mm wrench, and I'm going to tighten that up. Try it again. Okay. Now that's tightened up, but I still hear some other things that are loose. I can hear it over here on this side. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the axle bolt, and to do that we're going to use the 19mm socket and the 8mm Allen wrench, and we're going to put it on this side here and tighten this up. And sure enough, it's a little bit loose. Now you can tell whether or not it's loose because as you wiggle this back and forth, you'll see a little movement between the brake plate and the hub. You can actually hear it. Okay? We can tighten that one up. And this one, you want to snug it down, but you want to make sure that the wheel still spins freely. All right? I'll tighten a little bit more. Now, the wheel's not loose, and it still spins very well. I still feel a little movement in here, though. There's still a little bit of wiggle. Well, this thing here, the Kingpin Bolt, can also get a little bit loose and should be checked once in a while. Using your 17mm wrench and your 6mm hex, we can tighten this up. Make sure that's nice and snug. Yeah, just a little bit loose. And this one we're going to snug up like that, but we're going to make sure that it still spins freely right there. Okay? Now on this one, that really did tighten things up. I don't feel hardly any movement at all there now at all. Another place it can loosen, because with this one that we use when we fold it down, is this joint can get a little bit loose. And what I do is I pull this back and forth this way, and you can see that that joint there is a little bit loose. You can see it moving right at that point. You can check that real easily, and if it's a little bit loose, put your 6mm hex on that side, line up the joint, and tighten it. Okay, top one, lower one, and now the middle one. All right, let's check. No movement. All right, that's another place you want to check and make sure it's tight. Another area that we loosen or move once in a while is actually the crank. Because if we fold these things down, we take the crank on and off. If the crank will move a little bit, and we're going to take it like this and see, there's a little movement right there. See that little movement right there? That means that this crank bolt is not tight enough. We're going to take our 8mm wrench, and we're going to tighten that up. And that'll make sure that doesn't loosen. And this one you can tighten as hard as you can make it. Okay, let's see now. No movement at all. It's all nice and tight. All right. Another thing that will rattle once in a while can be this rear rack. Sometimes that can get a little bit loose. There's a 4mm right there. And we can take our 4mm wrench and tighten that one up. Just to make sure everything stays nice and snug. Alright, this screw down here looks like it got a little bit loose too. We'll tighten that one up. And on this side, that one's already tight. That one looks good. If your chain gets a little bit loose, you want to loosen these two 15mm acorn nuts here. Pull the wheel back a little bit to tighten up your chain and tighten those two 15mm acorn nuts again. Okay? There's one other place I want you to look at and think about, and that's the two screws that are directly underneath this pivot joint right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the machine on its front end so you can actually see those. So I'm going to grip the front brake like this. I'm going to lock it right there, put my foot on the pivot, lift this forward, set it down on the grips like that, and now we can see these two screws right here, and those also have to be maintained tight. With your 5mm wrench, you can make sure those are tight. Okay? One easy way to check your StreetStrider to make sure all the nuts and bolts and things are tight is do a little drop test. So what we recommend is that you pick the rear end up a few inches off the ground, drop it, and see what it sounds like. If it sounds nice and tight and it just bounces on the tires, everything's good. If you hear little rattles in there, this will cause you to hear those better. All you're really listening to is maybe a little bit of movement of these cables, but no rattling of bolts or screws or anything like that. That's the sound you want to hear. So these are the few of the places that when you have a machine like this, to make sure it's always performing well, go back and check a few of these things every once in a while. If you hear something rattling when you're riding, when you get it home, or before you go out, check around and make sure you know that all those bolts are nice and snug and the ones that are tight are as tight as they can be. Okay? Your machine will last a lot longer and you'll have much better riding experience that way. Okay.